Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Thank you for coming by. I am your host, Countdown, and I know we've been on a little bit of a hiatus, but I made some promises, and I plan on keeping them. I'm actually back from CES 2015, mostly working in the Samsung booth. I did want to show you something, though, that I brought back. I actually brought back 14 of these little guys. We had these around the show. These are Android pens. And it's one of the coolest things that's ever been at CES. I collected quite a few of them. This one is my favorite. It's the vampire. So very cool stuff that they had going on at the show this year. I'm sure if you have me on Facebook, you've probably seen some of my pictures and some videos of like the show booth and things like that. Very, very cool stuff. VR was a big thing this year. Curved monitors were a huge thing this year. It's actually what I was in charge of. Absolutely love it. Because I'm back from Vegas, I'm actually wearing my Vegas-esque kind of douchebaggy shirt here. But I like this shirt a lot, so deal with it. Anyway, so before I left, I told you that we were going to start talking about new things on the channel. So this is not going to be a video game gameplay video, although you will see those coming very soon. I can promise that. So today we're actually going to be talking about something that's very near and dear to me. You can actually see them behind me. It looks like there's Small World, Ticket to Ride, Kill Dr. Lucky, and right there is Dungeons and Dragons. Thanks, Luigi. So today we're actually going to be talking about role-playing games. I'm not going to be talking about tabletop games just yet, although I do have some stuff coming up. I want to, for tabletop games, I actually want to talk about the Brotherwise game, Boss Monster. I want to actually do that one first, but I actually want to get somebody else to play that with me. I will do that on camera for you. Today I want to talk to you about role-playing games, why they're so important, and basically what are the basics. So here's the deal. If you don't know anything about role-playing, there are two key factors that are involved. There basically are two parties at play here, and party is, in this sense, is going to be the actual sense, not like an in-game party. We'll talk about that in a minute. And not like a fist-pumping party. That's something else entirely. Although those happen sometimes. So the two parties involved are generally the game master, or in the case of Dungeons & Dragons, it's going to be the dungeon master, and the player characters. And the dungeon master is basically the referee, if you will, of the game, who not only crafts the world, sets obstacles in place for the PCs, but also creates other things like non-player characters, which are characters that are meant to drive the story forward, but they aren't necessarily integral to the story. So they, if your PCs are your protagonists, your NPCs are basically your supporting characters, or your supporting actors even. Generally, those are played by the GM or DM. As far as this video is concerned, we are now going to use the term DM, since we're talking about D&D, which is Dungeon Master, so as to not have any confusion. That being said, GM and DM are pretty much the exact same thing. It's just depending on what game you're playing. Okay, so DMs educate the game, they referee the game, they make the backbone of the story, but the PCs are the stars of the game. The PCs are the other people playing. They are the heroes, or anti-heroes, or in some cases they are the villains, depending on what kind of game you're playing. The important thing is to note is the PCs are the most important characters in the game. Now, player characters, like I said, are the most important thing. Player characters, if you're the DM, which generally I am, player characters or PCs are your friends, who have created these characters to live in, this kind of shared world. And I say shared world because it should not just be the Dungeon Master's world. There should be some group world building together. You know, when you're there creating the characters, you want to ask them, you know, what kind of character do they want to make? What kind of place do they want to be from? What is their background? What is their backstory? Things like that. So you have to build the places based around that rather than just offering, this is what we have, right? This is the status quo, and this is kind of what you have to build your box in. Now, there are already pre-built worlds. There's Faerun, there's Greyhawk, there's Eberron, which are all great, and they offer a breadth of places that you can come from and backstories and everything, but they are finite. It's very difficult to change those things unless the source book comes out later that says, oh, this place is gone, there's a new place here. Kind of like in games like World of Warcraft, there's a lot of freedom in those games, but eventually that freedom runs out. The idea is to give the players as much freedom as possible, while still guiding a story to a conclusion. Doesn't have to be a foregone conclusion, doesn't have to be a predetermined conclusion. You want to make sure that every story has a beginning, middle, and end. So don't just leave hanging, basically. Let's get into the basics. If in any role-playing game, especially D&D, there are some key steps. In the Dungeons & Dragons 5.0 book, it actually breaks it down into 3 parts. I'm going to talk about part 1 right now. Part 1 is about creating a character. And different game systems go about this a different way, but the idea is in D&D, you want to create a character that mechanically matches up to what you want to do in a role-playing sense. So the 2 basic premises behind D&D is you're going to be rolling dice, particularly this one. See if I can get it on a 20 for you. So you're going to be rolling dice, particularly D20s, right? This is a way to show basically the randomness of activities. You roll a D20, you add a bonus, which basically is how good you are at something, right? And then you total that together and you beat a difficulty class. So say I have pretty decent hearing, right? And there is someone trying to sneak past me. So that means my skill level at pretty decent hearing is probably about a 5. Pretty decent. If I roll a d20, I'll just roll one right now. Alright, I rolled a 13. So I would add that to my 5 and I would get 18. Well, someone was sneaking by me and they made a stealth roll. And they're not very sneaky, so they get a +2. But they rolled an 18, meaning they get a 20. So, since their number beat my number, even though I can hear really well, they're not that great at sneaking. They got really lucky, therefore I don't hear them. And that's basically the entire premise of the game, from a mechanical standpoint. So everything from, climbing up walls, to bargaining with a merchant, to making a peace treaty with the king, to crafting a hammer, to anything like that. That's all handled mechanically by the dice. Plus, any modifiers you have. And modifiers can be negative. You can be terrible at something. Like, you may be terrible at riding a horse. So every time you roll a d20, I just rolled a 2. Say I have a -2 to riding a horse. That's it. You're going to fall off immediately. You're awful at riding horses. And that's okay, because that describes the background of your character. So there's a mechanical aspect of the game. Boom. And there's also a role-playing aspect. So here's the thing. People role-play differently, right? Some people like to play this game like it's a video game. And that's okay, right? They want to hack and slash and they want to acquire loot and all this thing. And they want to hang out with their friends. It's perfectly fine, right? But you have to be comfortable from time to time basically acting like a character in the first person. Because the whole point of it being a role-playing game is you're playing a character like an elven ranger or a dwarven cleric. You have to be comfortable with speaking as that person in the first person. Now, you can say things like, my dwarven cleric walks into the bar. That's fine for describing your actions. You can even say, my dwarven cleric says, blah, blah, blah. But you actually have to kind of embody that character to a certain extent. So if you're brand new, it's okay if you get the jitters. It is like public speaking. You get over it at time. My suggestion is if you've ever taken any sort of ad lib or improv courses, that will help out immensely. But the mechanics and the role-playing aspect of the game are the key pillars of the game. So if you can get both of those down, you're going to have a great time. And it's okay if you're shy. You'll get it eventually. Role-playing games, especially D&D, are fantastic at bringing shy people out of their shells. Couldn't tell you how many times I thought a person was shy and they started playing D&D and they immediately became a different person, right? They have more confidence, not only in the game, but in real life. They make better friends. just because it's something that you're sharing together, and your personality comes out. So that's cool. All right. So there is a mechanical aspect, a role-playing aspect. So you use these to make a character. And like I mentioned before, you can play a dwarven cleric, you can play an elven archer, you can play a half-orc barbarian. In some cases, you can play, whatever. You can play a half vampire, part werewolf, whatever you want to be, just depending on what the world is like. The idea is there's enough freedom there to be what you want. And just have fun with it. Don't overthink it. There are some games where you always need, say, a cleric because they can heal. You always need a fighter because they can defend. You always need a striker, like a ranger or a rogue, because they can deal damage. And you always need a mage so that they can control the battlefield, light things on fire, things like that. That's not always the case. It is good to have a balanced group, but the best thing I can tell you is to have fun. We're not going to go in depth on character creation right now. We're just going to basically talk about just the basics, what the classes are like. So we'll get more into character creation, probably in the next video, sometime in the coming weeks. But in 5th edition D&D, you can be these classes, at least at the time of this video. You can be a barbarian, which is a fierce warrior. If you've ever seen a movie like Conan, obviously Conan the Barbarian, that's a barbarian. A bard is usually a character that plays a musical instrument or sings. They travel from town to town. A minstrel with an I, by the way. But basically, they're good at making friends. They're minor spellcasters. They can use swordplay, like fencing and things like that. Bards are pretty cool. They weren't always that way, but they are very cool now. In fact, one of the greatest characters of any game that I have ever dungeon mastered belongs to my wife, and she is a bard. Fantastic character. And that's not to say that all my wife's characters were fantastic, because there were some missteps along the way for everybody. But that is the best character by far in her repertoire, and one of the best in all my games. So bard, cleric. Cleric is one of my favorites. That is the priest class, basically. You do a lot of healing, protecting, and smiting of evil, destroying undead, which are like zombies, skeletons, things like that. Druid, you're basically a priest of the old faith, which is the way of the world. Druids are vegans with superpowers. Fighter. Fighter is pretty straightforward. You wield a weapon or two in combat. You're very good about basically tanking or defending your friends. You usually have a lot of hit points, means you're very tough. And, overall, it's a very easy class to play, and it's a lot of fun. Monk. Monk is, like you would see all those kung fu movies of old. This is going to be like your Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Jason Statham, all hand-to-hand fighters with elaborate combat techniques. That's going to be Monk. Very cool. Paladin is going to be your holy knight, different from cleric because they generally have more armor. They ride horses. They're all about basically this crusade. The knights of old, like, say, those in King Arthur's court, most of them were paladins. Ranger, if you've ever seen The Lord of the Rings, and I know you have, Legolas is a ranger. Somebody who scours the wild, is friends to animals, and generally is badass with a bow. You're a hunter through and through. Rogue is a scoundrel. Rogue is probably my other favorite class. Rogue is going to be like your Han Solo, all your guys from Assassin's Creed. They're liars, they're cutthroats. They will, kill their own mama for a nickel sort of thing. But they're also, like your lovable anti-heroes and things like that. Generally, they're very sneaky. They're very good at dealing high amounts of damage to one target. Also have, the arcane spellcasters. Sorcerer, which is a very unwieldy sort of, they have a ton of power, but it's very uncontrolled. Usually they have some sort of like draconic magic in their blood. Warlock, which is an arcane class that actually summons packs with either fae-like entities, like fairies and dryads and things like that. Demonic entities, which we will get into at a later date. But like fiends and devils and things like that. or far realmish entities, like the Great Cthulhu and very dark things beyond the stars. And then there's Wizard, which is probably one of the other big iconic classes with, Rogue, Cleric, Fighter, and Wizard. Wizard is that very learned, bookish spellcaster class, tons of power, tons of control, the easiest to play of the spellcasters. They are glass cannons at first, but by the time they max level, they are astonishingly powerful. More powerful than any fighter in any game. Wizards are going to be, like your Merlin, Elminster, if you've ever, read any of the Faerun books. All the wizards from Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. It's cool stuff. So we'll get into those in the next video, how to create one of these. We've covered the basics, what DMs and PCs are, what you can create, what it is to play the game mechanically. And we'll get more into that as we talk more about skills and dice and things like that. And what you can do to roleplay and be a good character, be a good DM, and be a good PC. All right, guys. This is a new segment. It's a little different. I would love for you to leave me any questions or comments in the box below. Okay? Great. Well, as always, thank you for coming to my corner of the internet. For more videos you can count on, I've been Countdown. Our intro and outro music is Biscuits by Evan King. A link to that track will be found below. And as always, a big shout out to Tadpog and Mal's Gaming Channel. That's it, guys. See you next show. Bye-bye.